In 1845, the struggling East Counties Railway invited George Hudson to the chair, barely a year after becoming Midland Railway chairman. Hudson appointed David Waddington as vice chair. Hudson, a Tory politician, fell from grace in 1849 due to having enriched himself while starving the line of cash. Hudson fled. The Industrial Revolution was at full swing during the 19th century, and it demanded coal and lots of it. One of the centre points for coal distribution became Doncaster, and the Eastern Counties Railway wanted to get to it. Hudson was renowned for getting what he wanted, but the Great Northern, suspecting there would be a protracted legal battle, approached Hudson directly and suggested that, if Eastern counties wanted coal, they should build a joint line from East Anglia to Doncaster. The Great Northern were concerned that their own territory would be compromised if Hudson had expanded into Lincolnshire. Whilst the Eastern counties was spreading north through Suffolk and Cambridge, the Midland was spreading south, reaching Rugby in 1840. The Eastern counties reached Ely in 1845 and branched to King's Lynn and Thetford. The Midland headed east in 1846 to Peterborough via Syston Junction north of Leicester. There were some issues at Saxby outside of Melton regarding land access, which took 2 years to resolve. Meanwhile, the eastern counties also reached Peterborough in 1847 with an additional route to Huntingdon through a future-proofed route via St Ives, not to be confused with the Cornish station of the same name. Stations at St Ives and Godmanchester, originally named Huntingdon, opened. The following year the Midland completed to Peterborough. The eastern counties from their St Ives junction connected to March in February, with stations at Somersham, Chatteris and Wimblington. The Great Northern sent a line north from Peterborough, splitting at Boston to reach Lincoln and Grimsby, just as the Manchester, Sheffield and Lincolnshire joined Lincoln with Grimsby through their own route. In 1849, the Great Northern opened a line from Lincoln to Gainsborough, with stations at Saxelby, Stow Park and Lee. Gainsborough also became a station for the Manchester, Sheffield and Lincolnshire, joining Sheffield with Grimsby and Manchester, and completing the South Yorkshire Coal Railway along the Don Valley through Mexborough and Doncaster. The Ambergate, Nottingham, Boston and Eastern Junction Railway opened Grantham's first station on a line from Nottingham in 1850. The Manchester, Sheffield and Lincoln opened a branch from Retford to Lincoln, crossing the Trent at Cottam. The first section of the Rugby and Stamford reached Rockingham, and the Great Northern Towns line passed through key towns of Doncaster, Retford, Newark, a new station at Grantham, Peterborough and Huntingdon, heading to London. The Rugby and Stamford line completed in 1851 through Morcott Tunnel. The Great Northern reached Horncastle in 1855. Huntingdon-on-Bain opened on a branch to Louth from Bardney in 1856 on the Great Northern Boston to Lincoln line. The Midland were keen, like others, to get to London, but connected to the Towns line at Hitchin via Market Harborough in 1857. The Norwich and Spalding, a small independent line, opened in 1858. In 1860, by public demand, another independent railway was opened from Bourne to Essendine. The Norwich and Spalding extended to Sutton Bridge in 1862, and the eastern counties merged with other railways such as the Eastern Union to form the Great Eastern Railway. The Great Northern created a branch in 1863 into the Lords de Ramsay's vast territory with a station at Ramsey and Abbey Town. Another independent, the Lynn and Sutton Bridge Railway, opened for service in 1864. The same year, the independent Bourne and Essendine sold out to the Great Northern. The first suggestion of a collaboration between the Great Northern and Great Eastern came after friendly workings through Norfolk, that the Great Northern offered the Great Eastern access to the coalfields through Gainsborough and Spalding. A joint line between the Great Northern and Manchester, Sheffield and Lincoln was given access to the Great Eastern in exchange for access to Lincoln. Skellingthorpe Station, north of Lincoln, opened on the Gainsborough line in 1865. In 1866, the independent Spalding and Bourne Railway connected end on end with the Norwich and Spalding, and the Peterborough, Wisbech and Sutton made a junction at Sutton Bridge. Later, The Midland reached Huntingdon via a branch through Thrapston. In 1867, talk of a joint line was problematic as the Great Eastern faced financial difficulties and was shelved. Meanwhile, the Great Northern connected Gainsborough to Doncaster with stations at Finningley, Park Drain, Haxey and Epworth, Misterton, Walkeringham and Beckingham, and also March with Spalding with stations at Guyherne, Murrow West, French Drove and Gedney Hill, Postland and Cowbit. The Spilsby branch line opened in 1868. After just 3 years, Skellingthorpe station closed, but another opened on the Lancashire, Derbyshire and East Coast Railway in 1897. The route to Skegness commenced in 1871 when Wainfleet was reached. In 1872, the Great Northern opened a line from Bourne to Sleaford. A joint line was discussed, but now the Great Northern made too many demands. In 1873, Skegness opened. The Ambergate, Nottingham, Boston and Eastern Junction Railway reached Boston in 1875. Donington and Louth connected on the Bardney line in 1876, then Mablethorpe in 1877. In anticipation of the Great Northern and London North Western Joint Railway opening, the Great Northern built their branch to meet Bottisford in 1878. St Ives connected to Ely on the Great Eastern as they recovered from some financial woes and loan repayments. The joint line, accessing Ironstone, opened 1879. The Great Eastern reached Ely from Ipswich via Bury St Edmunds. The Great Eastern needed coal access, and the Great Northern needed relief for the Towns line. They met again and returned to Parliament in 1879, authorising the Great Northern and Great Eastern joint line. The Great Northern lines from Doncaster to Lincoln were to transfer to joint ownership. A new line from Lincoln to Spalding with stations at Branston and Hayington, Potterhanworth, Nocton and Duston, Metheringham, Scopwick and Timberland, Digby, Ruskington, Helpringham, Donington Road, Gosburton and Pinchbeck, all on a line with an avoiding option at Sleaford. The Spalding to March Great Northern section needed re-signalling, and Huntingdon to March via St Ives from the Great Eastern. The joint line came into existence in 1882. A new station west of Godmanchester opened as Huntingdon in 1883. Godmanchester had been renamed the previous year. The Great Northern created a branch from Marefield Junction on the Great Northern and London North Western joint line to Leicester. Sutton-on-Sea opened in 1886 and the loop to Mablethorpe was completed in 1888. Joint Line opened a branch to Ramsey via Warboys in 1889, terminating at High Street. In 1894, a new line was built from Bourne to Saxby, near Melton, which was mostly single-track Midland Railway. The independent lines around Sutton Bridge merged, and with this, a new line was formed as the Midland and Great Northern Joint Railway. All references to the joint line now refer to the Great Northern and Great Eastern. Not too late to the party, the independent Lancashire, Derbyshire and East Coast Railway ran from Lincoln to Chesterfield, opening in 1896. The Manchester, Sheffield and Lincolnshire Railway built an extension to London, opening on the 15th of March 1899 and promptly changing their name to the Great Central Railway. On the joint line, just south of Doncaster, Bessacar Halt opened in 1912. Not much is known of it, as it did not appear on timetables and was closed by 1914. In 1913, the Great Northern created a shortcut to Skegness on the Kirkstead and Little Steeping branch. The 1923 grouping saw the names of the Ramsey stations changed to North and East for easy use. In 1951, the Bourne and Essendine Railway closed. Murrow West on the joint line closed in 1953. In 1956, the Bardney line closed from Louth to Donington. Ramsey East Station closed, but the line remained open. The Bardney and Spilsby branches closed in 1958. Retford and Lincoln direct route was closed in 1959. Most of the Midland and Great Northern route was closed in 1959. Mablethorpe to Louth closed 1960. Stowe Park and Ruskington became surplus to requirements in 1961. Godmanchester and Huntingdon closed in 1962. The Boston to Lincoln line closed to Woodall Junction in 1963. Stations at Walkeringham, Beckingham and Lee became disused. Bourne became isolated again in 1964 with the loss of the line to Lincoln. It had been serving the potato industry for its last 5 years. Spalding to Boston was closed. The Great Northern and London North Western Railway closed, including the branch to Leicester, as British ironstone quality was usurped by Swedish. The Beeching Axe fell in 1964. The remains of the Midland and Great Northern closed, and the line from St Ives to Ely. Warboys Station and the branch closed. Stations at Park Drain, Haxey and Epworth, Cowbit, Postland, French Drove and Gedney Hill, Guyherne, Branston and Hayington, Potterenworth, Nocton and Duston, Metheringham, Scopwick and Timberland, Digby, Helpringham, Donington Road, Gosberton and Pinchbeck closed, leaving a fairly sparse joint line. Finningley closed in 1965. The Great Central south of Rugby closed in 1966, as well as the Rugby and Stamford Railway. 1967 saw the loss of Wimblington, Chatteris and Somersham. The Great Central closed as far back as Rushcliffe in 1969. Misterton Station closed. In 1970, connections to the coast on the old Great Northern were closed, leaving Skegness at the end of a branch line from Sleaford with the closure of the Kirkstead and Little Steeping shortcut. Peterborough to Spalding closed. St Ives Station on the joint line closed. In 1971, Horncastle closed and took the line with it as far as Lincoln. British Rail reopened the Peterborough to Spalding line with a shuttle service of 3 trains each way per day. The Midland Thrapston line to Huntingdon was closed. In 1972, Peterborough was remodelled. Ramsey disconnected itself from the railway in 1973 with the closure of Ramsey North and the branch. The Great Central closed everything else in 1977, and the Lincoln to Chesterfield route was closed in 1980. The southern section of the joint line from St Ives to Spalding closed on the 29th of November 1982, avoiding £4 million in track renewals. The final section of the Ironstone line was disconnected from Bottisford to Newark in 1988. The southernmost end of the joint line from Huntingdon to St Ives closed in 1992, along with the St Ives to Cambridge on the old Eastern Counties route, which now forms part of a park and ride and a guided busway along this route to Cambridge. Spalding to Doncaster is still connected, so much of the joint line survives in favour of the original routes, which have long been closed with track removed. The joint line was run by a joint committee rather than a standalone railway, and thus it had no rolling stock or identity of its own, utilising both from the Eastern Counties and the Great Northern. The total track route was 123 miles, 198 kilometres. I'd love to read your comments on any memories you have of this line. Your stories enrich the history, and, as ever, please subscribe so you don't miss the next video. Thank you for watching.